Hey, before people think that I'm crazy, before all the hams say, what's he showing another CB on here for? This is going to be my 10 meter AM rig. I came across this. I have not seen one of these old Courier 23s in this kind of condition. I don't think I've ever seen one in this kind of condition before. It's immaculate. And this thing's going to polish up like a brand new one, at least externally. These things have the old form of the Heising modulation. Of course, it's all tube. It's got the old form of the Heising modulation where they're using the primary, the output transformer to the speaker for the reaction, for the reactor. These things can be made to sound so nice with the D104. You need like either a tube mic amp or a solid state mic amp to drive it, though it does require a little bit of drive. But these things will sound awesome. And it's all original. And it has all the original crystals in it. I can't believe I found this. You just don't see them in this condition. The reason I grabbed this thing is because back around 1977, I think it was, late 76, early 77, I acquired one of these, the exact same one. Now, ECI made this too before this. I forget what happened. This wasn't Fanon, was it? Maybe this is when Fanon took them over and they changed the face of it a little bit. They modernized it. Because the original ECI Courier 23s had the square meter. And I actually had one of those years later after having the one like this. I had another one of those. I had one of those for a short time back in around maybe 81, 82, 1981, 82 maybe. I only had it for maybe a couple weeks and I got rid of it because by then I was out of that stuff. But it had, the ECI had the copper chassis. The one I had it was one of the original ones and it was pretty pitted. I like these ones that came after because the copper's not there, so they're not pitted. Those copper pitted ones, there's not much you can do with them, except strip them down and paint them with that copper paint. But I'm not about, I don't take any radio down that far. It's not worth it. Some guys do, but I don't. But this thing will sound awesome on 10 meter AM. And there's a way I can change one of the crystals here to make it work on 29.0 and then retune it. But I'm going to look for the old PAL G model VFO, then I'm going to modify that if I can. The problem is those PAL G models, they're very hard to find. They didn't make that many of them, and I may never find one. Maybe in a couple of years one will come up. Maybe 2-3 years down the road. But for now, I got to figure out a way, maybe the rock bound it on 29.0. But I grabbed this because, look, the guy, he had a CB call sign stuck on here. It was KCX something. It was like, 3 letters and 4 numbers. The old Citizen band when you had to have still had to have a license. But look at this thing. I've never seen one in this condition before. Somebody had some tape on it at one time. Maybe it looks like they had them over the feet, so maybe the feet they thought would scratch whatever they had it on. So they put tape and somebody peeled most of it off and they just didn't get it all off. I mean, look at this thing. I mean, there's not really any scratches. This thing, Google will get that stickum off of there. Hopefully it didn't do anything to the chrome underneath. It'll probably come off. And I can buff this thing out with my, I'll get one of those little buffers for the end of my drill. This thing will all polish out beautifully. I mean, this thing will shine up like a new one again. So that's kind of why I grabbed it. And it was untouched. Now, like I said, I had one of these things back in 1977. What I used to have is I had a Fleet Courier 30B, the one that had the blue face, the old Fleet, the ECI Fleet Courier 30Bs. And I had that Compactron tube, and what that thing do like about 30 watts out or something like that. And I had a 29.0, crystal in it. And that thing, what I did was I set the squelch, and that thing, when cycle 21 started up, that thing stayed parked on 29.0. I mean, 24/7 for about 2 or 3 years. I just left the squelch way up, and it stayed on all the time. I mean, I unplugged it. This is back when I was living in Oklahoma and Tulsa. Of course, we had those thunderstorms in the spring and the summer months, so I had to, unplug it whenever that would happen, but it just stayed on. But I also had one of these with the PAL G model VFO. And whenever somebody would get on, and I had it run into an amplifier. So whenever somebody would come across, the 30B, and I'd get on there and say, I'd reply back real quick, and I'd warm up my Courier 23 with the PAL VFO, right? Going in, I think I had like a varmint amplifier. I forget which model it was, but it would do a few hundred watts. So then as soon as I make contact with somebody like George, one of my favorite people I used to talk to was old W1GAC, George up in Massachusetts. He became silent key, back in the late 90s, I think, early 2000s. But he was one of my most favorite people to talk to. And he was one of the guys I used to run these type of rigs with. I used to talk to him on these things. And but I'd fire that thing up, man. I'd get somebody on the 30B, then I'd warm this thing up, and if there was still activity or the guy or whoever I was talking to was still on there, then I would switch over this thing with the amplifier, and I could dial in right on frequency. I could go up and down the band a little bit. It was awesome, man. And but I gotta find the old PAL GF, the VFO, or I'm gonna have to make one. And I could actually come up with one on my own if I have to. But I could also figure out a way to I could probably get a crystal close enough to where I can make this thing work on 29.0. One of those 37 megahertz crystals. I think I can do it. Or it's gonna have to go up a couple megahertz anyway, right? So it's gonna have to be shifted. So anyway, but here's the other thing. Guess what else I found? Well, this is back when this thing was made. This was back when Citizen Band, there was still a time where it was some of it was considered being business band. They were also looking at business band communications. They were thinking of combining it. There was some thing going on. So Courier started making these things, hoping that there would be some business band activity on certain frequencies, if it was somewhere near this. So they came out with the BL100 linear, which uses a pair of 12 JB6s. And it's just a 100-watt amp, and it looks just like this. It sits right beside it, and it's plugs in the wall just like this thing does. Well, guess what? I found one of those too, and it's on the way. And it's almost as good a shape as this thing is. I'm like, you got to be kidding me. So I'm gonna have that going into the old mod to these radios were, if I remember right, this is the RF output tube, the 6BQ5. You put in a 6CW5 and it instantly brings the power up. But what you do is you peak the plate for the dip, right? You get it in the right spot, and then because it's a pi network, and then the load you put a modulating tone and you adjust the load for the peak modulation. This is where a lot of people get into CB radios and stuff, and they modify these things, and they say the CBers say you peak the radio, right? Well, they don't understand that you got a pi network in there. If the output is class C or class D, depending on where the emitter's biased on the transistor, usually the collector is grounded, right? I'm sorry, the emitter's grounded and the collector is the output, and they'll just peak both, the ends of the pi network for maximum modulated signal, right? Well, you don't ever do that on the input side of the pi network. You adjust it for the maximum carrier output without a modulated signal. Then on the loads on the other side, you can adjust it for maximum peak. That's the proper way to do it, and that's where a lot of like these guys that get the golden screwdrivers, the CBers, that get in there and they screw these things up because they peak both of them for a modulated tone, and you don't do that because you wind up splattering all over the place because you're actually, it's widening up the frequency at the input to the pi network, and you don't want that. You want it tight. You want that dip sharp. So anyway, lessons from an old ham like me I played around with a billion of these old CBs, and I know these things. That's why I remember the old 6CW5 mod on these. You know how many of these things I've worked on? I worked on the old ECIs too, but anyway, that'll be slick. And I think if I put the 6CW5 in here and I get everything modified, get the negative peak limited better, and it's going to be the modified type Heising, and I get the right maybe just an amplified D104 for now with the solid state amplifier built in just to drive it. Then maybe eventually I come up with a tube amp. Maybe I could find one of those old Dimco modulators, they call them. What they call that thing, a Dimco power modulator. And what it was an audio preamp, it was a mic preamplifier with the clipper built in. It was two tubes. The second tube was the clipper. That would work nicely on here. If I could find one of those, I could restore and modify it and drive this. You know, instead of using that amp that comes in the D104, then I could use a non-amplified D104 into the Dimco. That's probably what I'll do, and then I'll find something, or I'll just make my own homebrew mic amp for it and do it that way instead. But this thing should sound really slick. But with that 6CW5 and that BL100, I should be able to get over 100 watts out of it. So that should be pretty good. And that's all you need on 10 meters anyway. If the band's open, it's open. 100 watts is fine. If I can get this thing up a little over 100 watts, that'll be even better. And I know it'll do it. If I get 8 watts out of this thing into the amp, it'll be more than 100 watts out. So it should work nicely. So no, I'm not crazy, people. I'm looking at old relics. I used to have one of these, just the same one, the exact same one, just not in this good a condition. And I remember how good that thing sounded. The audio was beautiful on AM. It was awesome because of the old Heising setup. And if you set one of these things up right, these old modified tube CBs, especially this one, will sound like $1 million. I'm not kidding. And I could run it into the PAL amp too, and I still haven't done it yet. I'm still working on my antenna. Oh, by the way, my 80 meter vertical works on 75/80. It works on 20. It works on 17. It works on 12, and it works on 10. It doesn't work on 40 or 15, and which kind of makes sense. I'm surprised it doesn't. It's because of the overall length and the way the impedance is coming out at the base. But what I did was I went out there yesterday late afternoon, and I put a series coil at the base. It's about, I think it was like 12 microhenries, I think. No, it was 20, almost 20. I think it was 12. I think it was like 16 microhenries, like 16 microhenry coils between 12 and 20. I think it was 16, I remember when I measured it. And I put that in series at the base of the antenna with the coax feeder. And I could tune it up on 40. It was really tight, but then it tuned up on 15 like a champ. So I think that's all I've got to do. I can add one coil in there just to make it work on 40 and 15 to solve that problem. I'm surprised it's not working, but it's because it's with the ground radials and the element, it's not like a horizontal dipole. It's more balanced. It's what I've got is it's a lot different setup, and I don't have all the ground radials laid either. That'll probably help. But I'm going to make it work better before I even lay the rest of the radials. I'm just waiting for the rain to come. But I'm going to hook up the sloping dipole that I'm going to run this thing into on 10 meters. And I haven't put the ballon on there yet because I'm waiting for my clamps to come. I had one clamp. I thought I could do it with a bigger piece of PVC pipe to extend it away from the element. But I realized that the clamp wasn't long enough, and I couldn't find anything at the hardware stores. I couldn't find anything online. The only thing I could find were like the really long, big, huge, humongous ones, are like for axles when like repairing cars. What do they call those things on those spring things? Leaf spring, those clamps, 3-inch clamps, and those things are like the diameter is too big. So I said, screw that. So I decided to order another one of the same clamps, and I'm going to use my skinnier pipe and put 2 clamps over that a different way and clamp it to the antenna that way. So it's taken me a while to figure that out, and I just couldn't find the U-bolts that I need to make it work the other day, so I had to kind of stop and order the parts that I needed. So anyway, that's the next step. But this is going to be a slick radio. I'm actually kind of surprised I found this. I remember these things. These things were nice. And what I'm going to do is see where you have PA. I'm not going to use this thing for the PA. What I'm going to do is I'm going to modify this thing so it switches the output from the speaker to the PA speaker jack and back so I can drive an external speaker. That's what I'm going to do. So this will be the internal speaker, and this will be the outternal speaker. I'll just switch it to the outternal. So that'll be the outternal, the output, the external speaker. Outternal. There is no such thing, right? Internal and outternal. I guess you could say outternal, but it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So I didn't mean to digress, but that's where I am on this, and I just wanted to show you my new little toy. As soon as I get the BL100 amp in, I'll show you that one next. I'll show you both of them side by side. Oh wait, let This is what I should have been doing. Sorry about that. I should have turned this thing over and let you see it real quick. It's all original. It hasn't been touched. So it's slick, see? And it has the big crystals in the bottom. Now I could change these two crystals to two different crystals if I could find them, and then just use existing crystals in there for, to get it to cover 29.0 on up and down a ways. The problem is those old crystals up in there, they're probably drifted, and none of them are probably on frequency anymore. So that's the other thing. That's why it's better to put a homemade VFO on this thing, or find the PAL VFO with the G model one that you can modify and make it work for 10. So that's all for now. This is W5HR and an O.